From Washington, this is the HPS Macrocast with Hamilton Place Strategies and Markets Policy Partners.
Hello, welcome to HPS Insight Macrocast. This is Tony Fratto with Hamilton Place Strategies. Off today is John Fagan, who's off on vacation. John from Markets Policy Partners. Brendan Walsh is here in the studio with us today, as is my colleague Matt McDonald, also from Hamilton Place Strategies. It's an eventful Friday, August 23rd. We don't usually have eventful Fridays in August in Washington, but we had it today with the highly anticipated speech by Chairman Powell out of the normal Kansas City Fed fly fishing and monetary policy retreat at Jackson Hole. And so he had some things to say about monetary policy today and the economy and trade. And then we had reaction from the president, who I'm not sure that whoever was in charge of briefing him on expectations for the Powell speech, I think missed the mark maybe a little bit. But let's dive into the chairman's anticipated speech first. Matt, what's your read on it?
My take reading through the speech was there's two. One, I think from a markets perspective, and Brennan can speak to this better than I, but I think it was important for the perception of it to be not a change in policy. And just from some of the back and forth, I think there's been some credibility that he just needed to land the plane.
Exactly. I think what was priced into the market, he was okay with. A few more. He didn't want to change that narrative, and he didn't. Before the speech, we had 93% odds of one cut in September. After the speech, it was like 88, 89%. So he didn't move the markets.
Yeah, and I would say within the subject of the speech, I started reading the speech and it was like, let me start in the 1940s. And I was kind of like, okay, well, we're going deep. My takeaway is that he spoke to two challenges that the Fed is facing. The first is a different trade regime by the administration, and the Fed hasn't really operated in an environment where they have an anti-trade administration. And so how do they deal with that and its effects on the economy? And then the second dynamic that he addressed was, he spoke about it in terms of kind of what is the natural rate of inflation, and posed the question of whether that natural rate of inflation is in fact lower than it has been in the past. They've been, he kind of said we're in the zone, but not hitting the 2% mark. You have the dynamic of the EU and what they're trying to do on monetary policy in loosening, and then you add to that some of the stuff that we've talked about in the past in terms of demographic trends over time and what that implies in terms of interest rates and then the yield curve. And everybody's kind of feeling their way through what new normal looks like, which is how he termed it. And so I think he did a good job of teeing up these two, one short term in theory and one very long term dynamic that are new dynamics for the Fed, and how I would say it didn't really come across as here's our playbook going forward. It was more of these are different than the challenges of the past, and this is what we're wrestling with. And add to that and we are working hard to maintain the expansion, and that is really important. And I think that was the basic message.
Yeah, I totally agree. So in 95 and 98, we did these mid-cycle adjustments, and we cut 3-4 times. Mm-hmm. But then both times we went back and hiked again. And I think he was trying to set up that dynamic where I'm okay to try to keep this going, but we're not going to zero.
Right. I think. Read the speech, and he was trying to give a little bit of a history lesson here
Very much.
And you think of well, who's he giving the history lesson for? I'm going to speculate on that, but he was setting up his decisions. One of the things when he went back to the pre-Volcker days of educating on monetary policy, he talked about the stop and stop and go, and how that level of uncertainty for market participants leads to bad outcomes, and in fact leads to inflation. And we have the great moderation, and inflation isn't the problem today. But that was it's trying to, but to your point about sort of, communicating to markets the consistency of their policy and where their direction, which he has been, I think, probably rightly criticized for right. I mean, they had to make a pretty significant change in their interest rate outlook. So I think he's sort of demonstrating his commitment to that and trying to tell market participants that that's the way they're looking at the future. They want to communicate better, and they see it in a broader message. On the trade front, though, the thing that is outside of his control, which we saw this with his after the last FOMC announcement, he was very clear on the concerns about volatility in the trade front, and not just like an administration that's negative, but also, as we saw again today in great relief, just volatility on trade, up and down, and the inability to predict where anything is going on trade. The chairman referred to it as unprecedented. Those are unprecedented. It's an unprecedented situation for a monetary authority to have to deal with, and I think that's fair. Right?
Yeah.
We've never seen anything like this with, the two biggest economies in the world lobbying, tariff threats and actual tariffs at each other, and then
during the week when he's, the news is coming out as he's talking
No, it was
about
fascinating timing because, Powell definitely called out Trump, in that speech. And Trump waited about 7 minutes to justify all those
which resulted
those warnings
in an immediate 400-point drop in the Dow.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So the market was actually, the equities had kind of come back after the Fed Powell speech, and the dollar was slightly weakening, so the market took it as dovish, and rates had rallied a little bit, but then everyone forgot about Powell, and now we're. Well, your son, who has been my intern this summer, mentioned in one tweet we both called the premier of China an enemy, which is incredible news upon itself. But then also the Fed chairman.
The Fed chairman, yeah, who's worse, I think, is what he.
Yes, and he's worse. The Fed chairman, Powell's worse than Xi.
Yeah, which is really look. So it's unprecedented, and it is a challenge for him to deal with. Now, there is the other side that we talked about for some time, which is, it's possible the Fed's probably, maybe they are late. The economy has been somewhat hard to read. We have seen, the inverted yield curve. We see global slowdown. We haven't got any new good news this week on where the global economy is going.
The global PMIs were, now everything's below 50. The U.S. one came in below 50 for the first time, since the last recession.
It's hard to, I will say, on the Trump critique of the Fed, it's difficult to decouple what is actual policy critique, quote unquote, versus what is political insurance.
Right.
And I'm not sure that there's any difference, but it is an aspect of I don't know. I think that there's an aspect of he is making sure that he has someone to blame if things go sideways, and that is a non-trivial part of the jawboning from the White House.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of the things that we've when people think about what is this whole thing about central bank independence? What's that? What's that about? What's the point of that? And part of the point of that is that we've seen not just in the United States, but in economies all across the world, and lots of academic study on this, where presidents who are in democratic systems and have to go get elected tend to put pressure on their right. Some of them have fiscal controls, and they go and you see deficits rise. I remember looking at Ghana over a period of 20 years. Right, they got democracy first. Sub-Saharan African country to have democracy after South Africa, and you would see every election season, though, there would be this increase in the deficit, so increased spending during election years. You see the same thing in a lot of countries with monetary authorities, where very loose policy to juice the economy ahead of the election. Well, that was the reason why the U.S. Treasury Department, when I was there, and others would go around the world and tell countries that are trying to make their environment predictable for market participants and economic actors to at least have this one anchor, which is a monetary authority that isn't politicized. It isn't going up and down willy-nilly with the whims of the president, who could be at worst erratic, and best even just trying to do something in its interest in a near term.
Well, you saw it in Argentina when the finance minister resigned after the polls and the economy tanked. The economy, it had kind of settled, and then once he left, it tanked again because now you're worried that the politics are going to take over.
On the politics of the economy is that we're also coming off a week plus of a lot of political commentary on the state of the economy and whether it is weakening and what the shadow of that looks like for the president's reelection and that sort of stuff. So all of that stuff, I'm sure, is top of mind.
Yeah. Which I think that's what the Chinese did the analysis on. They've watched Trump now on the campaign trail a bit. He must be getting somewhat negative feedback on the economy from the rallies. And now we've talked about a couple kind of silly payroll tax and indexing to inflation. I mean, the capital gains. So I always thought that was a silly idea because that's a tax cut for the rich, and that's not his base. But he confirmed that to us this week that he's not involved in that. But then we get the weak PMIs, the U.S. ones below 50. And I think this morning, with China putting the tariffs on us, they put their chips into the center of the table and said, all right, are you going to blink? And he seems to have put his chips into the table too, but now we got a standoff. I don't know. How do you think it plays out?
I don't think anybody knows, and I think I think I want to just try to observe what we're seeing, and I think it's a really tough environment to make predictions because
it's impossible to make.
Yeah, if you try to make predictions on what you think ought to happen, we keep seeing we're not seeing things go in that direction. So what ought to happen isn't necessarily happen. Look, the easy thing to do if you were a president facing potential economic downturn heading into an election year, and everybody is telling you inside your building and outside your building that your trade war is causing an economic drag, and we're not telling you to put down your arms and not fight it, but can you go do it in a way that's a little bit more productive? So keep this process going, talk about talks, talk about things going forward. The market would react really positively if they just thought, okay, they're going to have substantive meetings. If he came out and said, we're going to talk for the next 6 months, we're going to meet every 6 weeks, we're going to meet here and in China and try to work to a positive resolution, the market would take off at that news alone. No actual accomplishment on anything, just positive vibes.
Well,
right?
I think that this is Greg Ip made this point this week, is that there is this dimension to all of this of there's a sentiment aspect to this, and whatever there's two dimensions to the trade war. One is that it's an economic drag, and two is that it's just preoccupying people's minds.
Right.
And to the extent that you're really late in a recovery cycle, and people are wondering how long this is going to go on, just the kind of animal spirits on that side of it, it gets a little dicey, and some of the heated trade discussions can end up being worse on that side of just where people's heads are at in terms of the economy than even in practice.
I agree with that. I want to take a break here, and I want to come back and actually dive just a little bit more into that on we don't usually talk about the politics around it. I do, but we are heading into an election year, and I think maybe more than ever before, politics are going to play a big role. And so I want to talk a little bit about how they're talking about the economy, some things that they might, possibly ought to be doing. But let's come back and have a little bit of politics and economic policy making talk. You're listening to the Macrocast, and we'll be right back.
Every 2 weeks, HPS measures U.S. adults' feelings and expectations for the economy. The Microsoft News Civic Science Economic Sentiment Index, powered by HPS, accurately measures movements in overall national economic sentiment and provides a more sophisticated alternative to existing economic sentiment indices. To learn more, contact us through HamiltonPlaceStrategies.com.
All right, we're back on the Macrocast. Brendan Walsh with Markets Policy Partners and Matt McDonald, my colleague here at Hamilton Place Strategies. So I want to talk a little bit about the politics of this. I remember being in the White House having to answer questions of, are we in a recession? It's back in 2007, and the National Bureau of Economic Research, they have something called a recession dating committee.
Yep.
That dates when recessions begin and end, and I would always push it off on them and say, I don't call recessions, they call recessions. Go ask them, But our job is to go and put things in place to try to make sure that growth is sustained. But it's almost an unfair, like a place where I have like a lot of sympathy for is for officials who have to answer this question, like, are you concerned about a recession? Because if they say, yes, we're concerned about a recession, that's your headline everywhere, right. And I think it does have an economic effect, right? It has it could cause people to stop being active economically.
But on the flip side, it is your job to be concerned about.
It is your job to be concerned, and you might look like aloof if you say, what recession, yield curve, what, and just go on. So it's a tough place to be. But then that's enormous. We weren't even running for re-election, right? But they are running for re-election, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because you could see the irritation in the White House and the staff. Is that I forget one of them was talking about how complaining about like the kind of the political media cycle on is the economy weakening and how much that was covered, and they're kind of like, wait a minute, where were you like 3 months ago? Like when the economy's been going great, why are now we talking about the economy all the time? I mean. I think that, look, I mean, on some level, there's the big impacts that they can have on the economy are the impacts that they had with the tax cut package years ago and trying to, and then they just have to kind of count on that to carry through. I mean, this is the bed that they're in, right? Yep. So from a policy perspective, it's not clear to me like how or if you can address the economy going forward.
Well, certainly not in this situation, right? I mean,
from a trade perspective,
that's something they can control.
That's the point. They can't stimulate the economy more, but they can take away the negative that has been the drag.
Yeah, I think that's right. And look, I mean, if they wanted, they came out. There's two things they can do. They could maybe three things. One is they can do something on trade by getting more positive on trade and less, hot. The other thing they can do is job owning, which they've been doing a lot of job owning to limited effect, I think. And then the third is you go out and propose policy ideas that could at least help people think, right? But
and attitudinally have voters saying, oh, they have this top of mind and they care and that's what they
the lights are on and they're doing something. But the ideas that they've rolled out in the last rolled out is not the right word, sort of tossed out. Things like the payroll tax, and they're not very well thought out. They wouldn't be big. There doesn't seem to be
happen. Yeah.
The irony is that Trump announced, I don't know, at a rally or on Twitter, I can't remember exactly. I think it was at a rally that that before the midterm elections that they're working on a 10% middle class tax cut, and then everyone kind of been. And then Ways and Means said, yes, we're working on it. And clearly no one had been working on a middle-class tax cut. But the irony is, had they been working on a middle-class tax cut, they'd actually have something right now to be out there talking about that wouldn't look like it's in reaction to an economic downturn. Just it's part of their policy, one of their policies that they're out there fighting for. So they should have done the work on it at least so they had it. But look, maybe it's time for infrastructure week, right?
I will say, like going back to Jay Powell's remarks, is that there was a chunk of his speech where he was saying the economy is strong and
totally agree.
Consumers strong and the job market is strong, and
specifically that employers are having a hard time finding quality help.
Yeah, it does have this quality of like the foundation's there. It's just like. The fights and the news and the coverage it's all destabilizing.
Let's be clear. If the White House this morning, or if the president himself on Twitter had come out and tweeted his agreement with Powell that wages are strong and unemployment is low and inflation is low and all the positive things he said about the strength of the U.S. economy, if that's what he went out and did, it would have been, that would have been very well received,
Yep.
and would have been great. But obviously, that's not that's not
Because even the market took the Chinese increase in tariffs fairly well. It was down a little bit, but it wasn't panic in the streets.
Yeah.
As a political measure, I joke about Infrastructure Week, but it might not be about it. If he did come out in this situation with a big infrastructure package and dumped it on Nancy Pelosi's lap
Call in
and
Chuck
said,
and Nancy and say, hey, let's talk.
like you're concerned about the economy and we want to do infrastructure. Here's our plan. Let's go. That puts them in a really difficult situation because you can't be out there saying, hey, like the economy's not doing so great. But you've got this infrastructure plan sitting in front of you that would put people to work and go take care of this problem that you've been talking about for a long time. Politically, it might not be a bad thing to do. It may have it won't have near-term economic benefits, but at least aspirational.
Right.
I want to go back to what you were talking about in terms of the counterfactual of what if Trump had responded differently this morning, because the other really interesting counterfactual going forward is like, okay, what if he gets voted out of office and who takes his place? And the interesting thing about that is that it's not entirely clear to me that trade wars go away. It's not entirely clear to me that there's
we've talked about that. Elizabeth Warren's foreign policy is not that different from
economic
Trump.
policy
Foreign-
was identical
Yeah.
to Trump. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to both watch market reaction and think about the state of the play on the Democratic side of the race, because it's not on some of these issues that we're describing. When we get down to it next year, there may not actually be much of a choice. It may just be kind of two different versions of similar approaches.
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe the approach will be different, but the policy might be similar.
Yep.
No, you're right. But the market is kind of just focusing on Biden's going to win, and Biden will go back to the Obama, and everything will be fine and hunky-dory, and kind of ignoring the other candidates who have very different views. It's pretty wide-ranging, especially foreign economic solutions.
Yeah.
Assuming that if that's the case, whoever if it's a Democratic president and you're left with the economy sort of hoisted on this trade war, unresolved trade war. If we're in an unresolved trade war situation, if you were advising that president what to do, you may go look and see if there are any leftover reset buttons to go and sort of restart those discussions. But to your point, if they may be directionally where some of them want to go, and you may not want to begin your presidency with what a lot of people will call a surrender.
I know
on the trade war, either too. So we're getting way ahead of ourselves on that if we get going that far. I think in the near term, though, they're not. When you have things like, and we had the yield curve invert again this week, so they want to blame this on reporters. Asking about talking about recession, talking down the economy, or the Democrats talking down the economy, and they may have a fair case on that if there wasn't an actual event out there for anybody to point to and say, well, this indicator has been successful every time in the past, so it's fair game to talk about recession, and you need to have answers for the recession question, and you need to have better answers than sort of walking out and tossing around dusted off old.
No, it's a really important point. And so one of the big banks did a piece today that they do a lot of the trading in the treasuries, and this strategist thought that about 50% of the recent flattening of the yield curve was from technical measures, hedging and things like that. And also banks having to buy. But irrelevant of that, the inversion of the yield curve can just become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter how we got here. If you're a CEO, every time it's kind of predicted recession, shouldn't you be cautious?
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't we take our last break there and come back and look ahead to next week. You're listening to the Macrocast.
Markets Policy Partners provide sophisticated financial market analysis that is independent, accessible, and actionable for a broad audience. Learn more at marketspolicy.com.
Okay, we're back on the HPS Insight Macrocast. Brendan, we have some data coming up next week. Not a lot. It is August,
Right.
and ought to be vacation seasons, the last week of August. So, what are you paying attention to next week?
So on the U.S. front, we get the July personal income and spending, and within that same report, we get the U.S. PCE price index. So that's the Fed's preferred inflation measurement, and we saw a fairly high CPI print for July. So the market's expecting, also a slight firming of the inflation numbers in the U.S., which Chairman Powell kind of mentioned today. Mm-hmm. So that'll be the big ones in the U.S. In Europe, we have a lot of confidence data, so Eurozone confidence measures, and then we also have the unemployment and their CPI inflation measures. But probably the big one that people will be paying attention to in Europe is the potential to form a new Italian government after the fall.
That was a long fall coming. It was sort of like, seeing somebody fall down the Spanish steps in Rome. Yeah, it's like there was a long fall. When it finally happened and Conte, announced it, I think Salvini's reaction was something like, "It's about time," or something like that.
I think he was at a party.
Yeah, it's one of the. Italy's going to remain an important economy in Europe, but we've got lots unsettled there, and we're heading into the fall of Brexit.
Yep.
Not seeing any real resolution there, any expectation that it's going to be anything but a.
In fact, opposite. They're actually planning
worse. Yeah, so they're planning for the breakout.
Yeah.
So, like the trade war. These kinds of unsettling activities, China distracted by not just the economic downturn that they have, but events in Hong Kong.
Right.
So there's a lot of uncertainty out there that if you're an investor, you're a business, and you're trying to plan the future, it's more challenging for you.
Yep.
All right, that's the Macrocast for this week. Brendan Walsh, Markets Policy Partners. We'll look forward to seeing John Fagan back
he'll be back
when he's back in town. Matt McDonald, Hamilton Place Strategies, and I'm Tony Fratto. We'll catch you next week. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the HPS Macrocast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and share.